To be here today and have my own work under the same roof as the work of my great-grandfather is an amazing privilege. I can't tell you much about Henri, or even his son Pierre, who was my grandfather, that you don't already know. Henri, of course, died long before I was born, and even my memories of Pierre are blurry. Pierre died in 1989, and I was born in 1984. That family legacy, which at one time felt daunting and omnipresent, like a shadow cast by some huge thunderhead, has become something different. It's shifting as I speak, or maybe it's me just slowly walking out from beneath it. The story of those megaliths is becoming more like my other story, the one I'm going to tell you about today, just adding a richness and texture to my life and my work that can be like warm sunlight instead of shadow. To find myself, I had to first run away, and as luck had it, it was to North Carolina. I grew up in a large white clapboard church in the center of a small New England town. My parents, both artists, bought the church in the early 80s and slowly converted it to their home and workplace. Their studios on the ground floor, the gallery and living space above. This was the main room, and you can see there's some bells that my father made hanging on the wall. This was a large installation that was a model for a big GE office space. And then that was our rocking horse that he built for us as kids. We were always surrounded by the creative process. Here, on Easter morning, my father prepares our eggs for dyeing, sucking out their yolks with a vacuum pump of his own design. Omelets always followed. And as I said before, my father, Paul, was here yesterday with his wife, Mimi. His larger works include the kaleidoscope, a circular rectangular metal frame filled with rheoscopic fluid and covered with a sheet of glass. When heated or agitated, the fluid moves in beautiful patterned currents, like the ocean when seen from an airplane high above. He has also had a long-time fascination with bells. Many of his bells are designed and placed for the public's use and enjoyment, like this single bell installed in a sculpture park in the south of France. And there's 4 hammers, and when you pull that rope that hangs down in the middle, they strike the bell at the exact same time. And one of the most amazing things about his work is the inner mechanisms, which are all hidden behind that aluminum, but they are so complex, and he designs them all himself. So from the outside, it looks like a very simple thing that's happening, but the inside is just, the inner workings of the piece are sort of almost a work of art themselves. And they are so complicated that they often break down. But that's something he is always contended with. The one pictured here is housed in a grain silo owned by an old friend and fellow artist in Groton. And this bell, the sound within the grain silo is just amazing. As you can imagine, the reverberations, it just goes. And the bells all ring for upwards of 5 or 6 minutes. And there's a series of stools or benches that are built into the side of the silo, and you can sit and meditate on the sound. This slide was out of order, but that is the church from the outside. It is still exactly as it's looked since the 1800s, because it's in the historical district. So, and then the inside has just been completely transformed. My mother, Linda Hoffman, who was also here yesterday, had a studio on the ground floor of the church. I spent many afternoons hiding under a large table in the center of the room that she used to lay out her textiles. Her work has taken many forms throughout the years and now involve many found objects and small bronze castings, which she incorporates into hollow tree trunks and discarded rusty farm equipment. She now lives on a farm 20 minutes from the church and has brought an old apple orchard back to life with her partner Blaze. They have created a place for farmers and artists to come and share their work and their lives. They have sculpture walks that happen throughout the orchard, and it's an amazing thing that they've done. It's just outside of Boston, called Old Frog Pond Farm. I've worked predominantly in clay since the 7th grade. When most of my friends were playing basketball and soccer in the afternoons, I took an arts elective instead. Clarence Rabideau was my first teacher, and in high school, Jackie Sedlock. Most of my early time was spent making masks with sad, long faces. I didn't touch a wheel until I made my way south, and for some reason, all of the masks I had, they were very serious. There was nothing sort of funny about them except for the size of their noses. I did this for a number of years, and a little bit when I came south, but not much. I moved to Greensboro, North Carolina, to attend Guilford, a small liberal arts college with Quaker roots. I had no intention of continuing along a path in clay, though the material had fascinated me since the 7th grade. College seemed a time for academics and a pursuit of the mind. Greensboro seemed at first like a barren wasteland, filled with industrial parks and strip malls. The same monotonous, undulating hills stretched for miles in all directions. Humid and hotter than the north, filled with brick ranch homes from the 50s, nothing about it felt like home until I made my way back into the ceramics studio. Guilford's ceramic program was small but powerful. Charlie Teft, the director of the department, has done amazing things there with very few resources. Here, I fired my first wood and salt kilns and scraped away dirt along a soft riverbank to expose a seam of bright yellow clay. With Charlie, I discovered that North Carolina was an amazing place to make pots. While at Guilford, I had opportunities to fire kilns with potters like Ron Myers and Matt Jones, who I would later apprentice with. The hospitality and graciousness they showed me was seductive, and that's something that really is. All potters are like that. We just seem to be the most welcoming group of people, and we'll go way outside of our, and there was a number of potters here yesterday, so I've experienced that with everyone I've met practically. I've driven the long stretch of Highway 40 that runs from Asheville to the eastern Piedmont of North Carolina countless times. The highway took me from one workshop to another. The state of North Carolina has the highest concentration of potters in the country, and I happened upon it all by chance. The beginnings of Southern pottery go back to 3 traditions. In the late 18th century, Quaker and Moravian potters made their way south through the Shenandoah Valley and set up workshops in Guilford County and what is now Winston-Salem. They made beautiful earthenware decorated with complex designs using a technique called slip trailing, which has been pretty much the only decorative technique that I've used since I've been on my own. Very little of the early earthenware remains today, but its warm and variegated surface designs place it among the finest earthenware traditions in the world. In South Carolina, Abner Landrum developed the first southern stoneware production centers in Edgefield. In Edgefield, the potteries were largely run with slaves, the most famous of whom was a potter named Dave, or after his emancipation, David Drake. Dave, who against the laws of the time had learned to read and write, inscribed his pots with rhyming couplets as seen on this large storage jar. The pots from the slave potteries of Edgefield used an ash glaze that Abner Landrum brought from China, mixing wood ash, lime, and clay to create a non-porous surface on the durable stoneware. It was a low-cost alternative to the expensive salt glazing tradition of the North, which, since I've been here, someone said there has been a long tradition of that in Rochester because of the proximity to the salt mines, and salt being so expensive in the South, which has always been poorer, they opted for this method. And these David Drake made these huge, they're great big, 10 20, 50-gallon storage containers, which was also rare at the time for people to be making pots of that scale. The alkaline glaze, as it was called, eventually made its way north to counties in the western Piedmont, where farmer potters made work in what is now the Catawba Valley. The pots were characterized by their dark fired stoneware clay and a runny and fluid glaze made of ash clay and the addition of crushed window panes or clinkers from coal production. This was made by Daniel Siegel, who there's a number of old pots. If you just go on eBay, you can see, type in Catawba Valley, you can see the huge variety. But Daniel Siegel's were the curves were amazing, and you could tell that he was taking so much pride in making this thing that they would be paid, a penny a gallon for these as they were making them. And that's generally how the volumes were determined back then. So you really see the sort of craftsman and the artist all taking pride in their work here. And in the eastern counties, potters from New England, like the Websters, settled, bringing with them the northern salt glaze tradition. Though the Industrial Revolution brought a sharp decline in the production of the utilitarian wares, a few key figures like Jacques and Juliana Busby helped usher in a new era of art pottery, which flourished between the wars and still does in centers like Seagrove, just south of Greensboro. In the western part of the state, where I have settled, the more recent creative centers include Black Mountain College, now defunct, but once home to a vibrant, wild, and well-known group of artists. These are a few huge figures from the ceramic past. Bernard Leach, who was taught Michael Cardew. Michael Cardew started our sort of school with teaching Mark Hewitt, and I'll go into that in a minute. The Anglo-Oriental school, as seen here. And the Penland School of Crafts, which is still home to a large and growing group of artists and craftspeople. Like any sustainable ecosystem, North Carolina pottery thrives today because of its diversity. We still have rooted traditionalists of the Catawba Valley, like Kim Ellington and Charlie Lisk, and potters whose work they've inspired, like Michael Klein near Penland. We have the work of Michael and Naomi Hunt. Their rough and sturdy forms seem at first glance more Korea than Carolina, but they are extraordinary exemplars of the region's rich geology. Something that ties a lot of North Carolina's potters, makes them separate, is our use of local materials. Taking clay, refining it, taking a kaolin, which is mined in the mountains near where I live, and to make that slip on the surface. There's just a few things like the green, that copper would come from elsewhere, but you really see there's a sort of elemental quality to the work. We have the refined and delicate sgraffito work of Steve and Becky Lloyd, and the haunting figurative work of Christina Cordova, who is also near Penland. And there is the Hewitt School, to which I belong. We are a tight-knit group where membership is gained through the process of apprenticeship. We are tied together by something stronger than just the pots we make, to an unbroken lineage of potters, each one improving on or pushing past the one before. It goes back 4 or 5 generations, and the family tree has grown large and tangled. It is a healthy and vital artistic movement. Though we lack an official manifesto, some of the defining characteristics of our group include the use of large wood-burning kilns. The man standing in that kiln, who I work with, John Vigeland, is 6'7", so that gives you an idea of the size of that space. An athletic approach to throwing, yielding light, well-made, and quickly thrown pots. And a use of relatively unrefined materials, lending to the work a ruddy and serendipitous quality as seen in this large jar by Daniel Johnston. Unfussy, as Mark Hewitt likes to say. Mark Hewitt moved to the States in 1984 and set up a pottery with his wife Carol in Pittsboro, North Carolina. Mark makes a lot of pots. With the help of apprentices, they fire a kiln the size of a school bus 3 times a year. Again, these kilns that everyone has down there are the size of this stage and practically the shape of the stage with a curve to them. Mark is an outspoken and tireless champion of North Carolina pottery and has been passing on his knowledge and enthusiasm to a new generation of young potters for the past 15 years. Of those who have stayed in North Carolina, each is offering something new to the canon. And Mark's apprenticeship program, his record is really pretty good. A lot of the people that have been through it are still out there making pots and making a living making pots, which any potter will tell you is no easy task. Daniel Johnston in Seagrove made an awe-inspiring installation of 100 large storage containers made with a technique he learned while studying in Thailand. Daniel made, on the last day of this project, all of those jars in one day, which is unbelievable. And you can see he is exhausted in this photograph. The 100 jars stretched for over a quarter mile down the country road next to his workshop and kiln. And he did this project, sort of a publicity stunt. He invited people to come and buy them, the collectors. They all came, lined up. Some people camped out in his kiln the night before, which was still warm from unloading the pots. And when he sort of released them, he sold all of these in 17 minutes. And the whole project was really to say that if you go somewhere and you learn these hand skills, these old skills, like he learned in Thailand, where one guy would make 10 pots in a day, you could sell these for relatively little money, $450 for a great big pot, which is kind of unheard of. He doesn't do that anymore, but at the time it was just a statement to say that these are skills that people used to have, and this is how you could make it work. Doing that, which is rare that those hand skills still exist to that level in the Western world. Matt Jones, who lives outside of Asheville, North Carolina, with his wife, Christine, and their 2 children, recently took on Garth Clark, the Goliath of ceramic critics, in a series of writing pieces he called Critique of a Critic. The last chapter to Jones's conversation with Garth, as depicted here in these plaques by artist Matthew Causey, ended with Garth and his partner Mark Del Vecchio visiting a state and ceramic culture he has often maligned for being dead. When he left North Carolina, he was astounded by what he had seen. For those familiar with Garth's writing and past opinion, it was a real coup. Matt's newest body of work, which he calls country funk, combines the vernacular style of the Southeast with imagery and words of the modern world. Here we've got this guy wearing his Metallica shirt fishing for catfish in the creek with a bottle of Pepsi maybe at his feet. And he writes poetry, and it's amazing work. You could do a whole presentation just on this body of work. And Joseph Sand, who I worked with at Hewitt's and consider a brother. Joseph lives near Greensboro with his wife Amanda and their young son. He makes monumental jars and vases with vibrant colors and sumptuous running glazes. North Carolina potters and their patrons form a special community. Their reciprocal relationship make the state an anomaly in the world of craft. There are times when it feels cloistered and cut off from the contemporary world of design and fine art, cut off from the high-gloss pages of Dwell magazine and the galleries of Chelsea. There are times when it feels old, repetitive, dogmatic, and stuck. During these moments of self-doubt, the words of my friend Henri Glassy, a folklorist with a special interest in traditional folk pottery, helped me stay the course. Henri writes, "Pottery is the most intense of the arts. It brings the most to bear within the smallest compass. Pottery makes plain the transformation of nature. Clay from the earth blends with water from the sky. The amorphous takes form in the hands. The wet becomes bright in the fire. Cooked, the useless becomes useful. Pottery works in the world. Displaying the complexity of the human condition, it brings the old and the new, the personal and the social, the mundane and transcendent into presence and connection. It's that connection that creates the magnetism I'm most interested in. The pot is a clear symbol of human necessity. Its functional beginnings symbolize, as Octavio Paz says, the almost invisible scar commemorating our original brotherhood and sisterhood. We can look on it as we would a beautiful fertile valley or a strong horse, and it says, this object could help me live, and we connect with that object. If I make that object beautiful, I make a connection with those who view it and deem it beautiful. And that's the heart of my own desire, to make a connection with you. I want the work to exert a magnetism as if with some unknown algorithm. The method through which I learned to be a potter in the workshops of Matt Jones and Mark Hewitt can best be described by the scientific definition of the word osmosis. The word osmosis may be used to describe a physical process in which any solvent moves without input of energy across a semi-permeable membrane separating two solutions of different concentrations. Although osmosis does not require input of energy, it does use kinetic energy. And the definition succinctly describes the learning process of the apprenticeship. The solvent is the information passed between the two, both physical and metaphysical. The physical is represented by the handwork, the repetition, and the muscle memory. The metaphysical is represented by the theory and the brotherhood that one absorbs through working day in and day out with a master or a teacher. The two solutions of different concentration are the student and the teacher. The student is the empty vessel, the teacher is full. As the days and years pass, the solvent of the teacher passes on to the student, and when a level of saturation has been reached, the process of osmosis has been completed. Although the apprenticeship process takes some time, 2 to 3 years at the least, the daily energy expended in transferring the information is much less than many other student-teacher relationships. It is an incredibly efficient form of teaching, so long as both parties are fully committed to the process. And it's one of the few modes of teaching where the teacher continues to devote the majority of their time to making their own work. The only loophole in the theory, as a friend pointed out, would be the question and fear that the teacher's solute or their creative energy might become diluted through the exchange. What we see instead with a successful apprenticeship is that when things happen as they should, each participant, teacher and apprentice, begin to generate their own creative energy. And towards the end of the apprenticeship, this energy begins to flow in both directions. The relationship becomes entirely symbiotic. As an apprentice, I would come into work at 8:30 and ask Matt what needed to be done and when. There was usually wood to stack and chainsaw and split, clay and glazes to mix, and a variety of other small chores to help keep the pottery running smoothly. When I completed my chores, I was allowed to make pots. The pots I made were technically not mine. Everything I made was property of the Jones Pottery, and he would sell it as his with the apprentice stamp. At the end of each firing, I would be given a credit where I could purchase some of my favorite pots. Before I would begin the making for the day, Matt and I would settle on a shape that I would make, and he would throw a model for me to work off of. I watched carefully as he threw the piece and placed it at the front of my 5-foot wearboard. For the rest of the day, that pot was my vision of perfection. My work was to replicate the pot as best I could, trying to capture every nuance, from the thickness of the rim to the width of the foot. Which this process really goes way, way back. And even Matisse, Henri, or or Hank, as my family affectionately referred to him as, even he was trained in that method by copying a master. And so I don't know what happens in art school now, because I haven't been to art school, but I think it's much more about the individual. But it just goes to show that like real creative energy can come from that process. It doesn't have to come from just throwing yourself into art school and where the individual is sort of raised up. It's good to have the hand skills. I came to work with Matt after dropping out of college, where trends and the desire to be hip held sway over the student body, myself included. I initially had no interest in surface decoration. I thought it was folksy and staid. It wasn't until I began to decorate pots with Matt's urging that a whole world opened to me. We began to encourage and challenge each other to grow. Matt would deftly lay down a design and I would riff off of it, adding a new element or a new style, and he would riff off of mine. However, as the apprentices' strengths develop, they begin to see through their own eyes. They begin to question, then challenge their teacher's work. This is the natural progression, and it signals the time to move on. The pot pictured here was given to me by Matt upon the completion of my apprenticeship. After my apprenticeships, I found an old farm in western North Carolina and began to build my workshop and kiln. These show sort of the first year, which was a brutal winter, and we pulled a few logs out for the kiln shed with the horses. We pulled a few out with my neighbor's tractor. It was an unbelievable time, and a big winter for us is where we have a foot of snow or something like that. I know up here it's nothing to even bat an eyelash at, but. And I grew up in Massachusetts, but in North Carolina, if there's any snow on the ground, nobody does anything. So it was frustrating for me. This is the kiln in the sort of afternoon sun from our little garden. Before a shovel hit the ground, I met Connie, who's sitting right here in the front, and she has been with me ever since. Together, we have formed and shaped East Fork Pottery. Her own role, whether cooking the amazing food we offer at kiln openings, hosting pottery dinners, writing newsletters, or firing the kiln through the frigid night, has been crucial in shaping what East Fork Pottery has become. Her most important contribution, though, has always been her eye to the future. She has never let me settle into what is easy and comfortable, always pushing the work to new places and new venues, and is really part of the reason this collection of pots is here today. Recently, a friend, John Vigeland, has come to work alongside me. We both come from the same ceramic lineage. He was taught by Johnston, who was taught by Hewitt. Here, John is making these monumental pots. John, as I said before, he's 6'7", and the pots he makes kind of resemble him. They're tall and skinny, and as you can see in there, some of the pots I make are a little shorter and rounder. Here we are working now in the model of a European atelier, where we both create under this umbrella of East Fork Pottery. Each piece receiving the East Fork stamp, which can be seen on pretty much all of the pots in there, as well as our individual maker's mark, a V for Vigeland and an AM for myself. Because of our shared aesthetic sensibilities and a similar technical approach to the work fits together well, and we each bring our own individuality and agency to bear in our labors. Here you see a pot of John's, a pot of mine, and a pot of John's, and they each have their own distinct style, but because we use the same materials, because we have the same training, they fit together side by side, and we've been working together for a year, and it's a very foreign concept to a lot of people because it challenges the notion of rugged individualism, but we're excited for what will happen. I look at the work in this collection as the first few steps in what I hope will be a long journey. It's the foundation from which everything will be laid. This traditional wood-fired work is the trunk of the tree, and now there are a number of new branches extending out. It will inform my future and my aesthetic values for as long as I am making. We all three see the worlds of North Carolina pottery as something to cherish and challenge. We hope to push further and further out of the comfortable armchair of the Southeast. So these are some Luna moths, and they're using the slip-trailed technique, but instead of slip-trailing, and this is a line, this is a stem, this is a leaf, this is a flower, I'm using it as sort of pattern and infill to create something like this. And so these small breakthroughs happen, and they're fun, and I do them for a while, and then I sort of put them down. There's one charger in there with some moths on it. And now I'm really interested in these geometric patterns, which you can also see some representations of in the gallery. To take a traditional practice out of its native environment is difficult. Over the past year, we've been exploring new techniques and materials. Like here, this is electric-fired. It's as far away as you can get from the wood-fired work, and it represents something completely different. It represents trying to explore the design side of things, where this is a product, maybe somebody else could make it, maybe that we employ, so we offer some more jobs to people, and we've been working on this. It's still a ways off. Finding a glaze that is absolutely perfect is polar opposite from what we do in the wood kiln, and has been very humbling. As we embrace these new techniques and challenges, we take on the burden of any good traditionalist. We have to invigorate our tradition with something new. The lights, although not included in this show, mark a serious departure from the world that I know. The process of slip casting is closer to chemistry than the physical and visceral work of throwing. Hundreds and thousands of hours spent on a wheel have given me a keen sense for form and balance. And I bring this eye into the design process, creating a single object which can then be reproduced. And I've found a way to incorporate the slip trailing into these lights, which I really love because it's taking the traditional world and the modern world and bringing it together, and that's been incredibly exciting. And it seems to work in a way that's not very forced. We also make these lights undecorated, and then you have much more of just a kind of modern thing you'd find in your lighting store. But people have responded to them. They have a wonderful warm glow. Again, they are impossible to make, and we have been working for the last really year. But they're coming along. Below you see an ometto hanging. In the workshop, there are good days and there are bad. I wrote as an apprentice at Matt Jones's, "On these days, the work is maddening. The clay stays obstinately close to the wheel, falling back down when it is worked too hard, tired and wet, retiring to a growing pile of slumped pots in the corner of a splash pan." I had always thought that as the years progressed, there might be more good days and fewer bad. I thought that my relationship with the work would grow more comfortable, and the pots would come more easily. The opposite seems to be true. The work is just as hard, just as maddening. On days when something is off, it's as if I have forgotten how to speak or walk. One's eye always improves faster than the hand, and I often find myself struggling against those formal standards and comparisons handed down from mind to hand. There are days when I don't make a pot, consumed in a cloud of rage and self-loathing. But on the good days, the clay swells with possibility, springing from the wheelhead effortlessly, as though it could not wait to be turned to its final form. The following two videos by my brother Nicholas Matisse show one of the most visually intriguing parts of our process, and one that really separates it from a lot of other ceramic practices. In the first video, we see the loading, which takes 4 days to load 1,000 pots into the kiln, roughly, give or take. The second video shows the firing, which takes place over 3 days, where the kiln is constantly tended through the night and guided slowly to its top temperature of 2,300 degrees. So that process takes about 3 to 4 days, and we're usually rushed, and we're usually behind schedule, so we usually are loading long into the evening. The front of the kiln, where you see we walked through, that whole space gets bricked up with doors, and we start the fire. I don't talk about the particulars of my own work very much, what it means or how it should make you feel, or dissect it with the dry and convoluted language of an MFA program, partly because I have no idea how to speak that language. Understanding the context in which it's made is far more helpful, and beauty, my only other real concern, needs no context at all. In the end, we need only make with as much honesty and abandon as we can muster, and if we're lucky, the work will communicate something on its own. To be a potter in the 21st century seems its own form of quiet protest, and in the end, the action alone is as important as the things we make. So thank you all so much for coming, listening, and Thank you.